The very first thing Diana did after being reborn was to march onto the stage and expose the affair between her husband, Richard, and Claire, right at the exact moment he was receiving his award. In her previous life, Claire had used her status as the widow of Richard's late student to move into their home. Under Richard's blatant favoritism, she drained all of their family's savings and even targeted the living expenses meant for Diana's children. Later on, when Richard was transferred to the big city, he only brought Claire along with him. After that, he abandoned his wife and children, vanishing completely. When Diana had questioned him about the past, he told her that she wasn't worthy of joining him in the city to enjoy a better life. After being reborn, Diana no longer passively endured it, but actively fought back. Hey guys, what happens when a betrayed wife stops crying and starts building an empire? Today, we're breaking down how Diana completely turned the tables on her cheating ex. Let's get into it. This time, she successfully divorced him and got her rightful share of the assets. She immediately turned to her brother-in-law and bought up the internal shares of their factory. After that, she headed to Chicago. Years later, the company where Richard worked underwent a restructuring. Diana acquired it, becoming his ultimate boss. She told him, "You're not cut out to be a manager, but scrubbing toilets suits you just fine." On the day Diana had gone looking for Richard, a light drizzle was falling. Because her body was weak and she was dizzy from starvation, the security guard only had to give her a light shove for her to collapse into a muddy puddle. Right at that moment, Richard walked up to her, bringing Claire and her son along. Richard frowned, looking down at her from above, and called out, "Diana," but he made no move to step forward and help her up. His gaze was complicated, a mix of pity and poorly concealed contempt. It was completely clear that in the past, he had once looked at her with eyes full of love, saying, "Diana, you're amazing. With you by my side, even suffering feels sweet." But everything had changed with time. His eyes had gradually become glued to Claire, no longer lingering on Diana in the slightest. He had even grown impatient with his own 2 biological children, and had even started scheming to bring Claire's son to live with them. Diana's consciousness blurred and then slowly faded back in. Being covered in mud from head to toe made her incredibly uncomfortable, but she lacked the strength to pull herself up. Claire's son let out a strange, mocking laugh. "Diana, you cheap woman from the countryside, you reek." Claire hurriedly covered his mouth with her hand, saying, "Kids say the darndest things." Her eyes darted back and forth, but she couldn't hide her smugness. Diana struggled to lift her head to look at the 3 of them. They were all wearing wool coats, looking neat and imposing, like a picture-perfect family of 3. They were so in sync that it was heartbreaking. Claire and her son both had rosy complexions, clearly living very well and being thoroughly taken care of. So, after taking over her home, they had also been bad-mouthing her behind her back. Their positions had completely reversed. In reality, when Claire first arrived at Diana's home, she hadn't been much better off than Diana was now. Back then, her son wasn't with her. He had been sent to live with his grandmother. Rumor had it they barely had enough to eat. Claire couldn't even fend for herself, let alone take care of her son. But now, it was a completely different story. The mother and son were plump and radiant as a spring breeze, as if they wanted to parade down the street to show off. Diana looked over at her own son, thin and frail, still trying his hardest to pull her up, but he simply didn't have the strength. After several failed attempts, he was dripping with sweat. A fire of rage ignited within Diana's heart, burning like an inferno, her anger surging violently. It was only then that she suddenly realized that Richard had already secretly brought Claire's son over to reunite with them who knows how long ago. In her previous life, she hadn't come looking for him as early as she did this time, so she had been completely in the dark. Back then, she had still been obediently working in the small county town, working hard to earn money to support the family, naively and devotedly serving her mother-in-law, and trying her absolute best to take care of her 2 children after the strict family planning policies were heavily enforced. Diana had been forced to get an abortion, but because she hadn't been able to rest and recover properly, her body was left riddled with all sorts of ailments. There had been no news from Richard, and she hadn't dared to ask too much. Money was already tight, and she was even worried that something bad might have happened to him. Who would have thought that he was busy building a love nest, acting all affectionate and deeply in love with his mistress? Diana struggled to stand up, looking straight at the mother and son, and spoke up. "That child doesn't know me at all. Yet, the moment he saw me, he called me by my name and called me a stinking countrywoman." If an adult hadn't taught him, how would he know to say that? Claire startled, bringing her hand up to cover her mouth. Her long fingers were as white and smooth as jade. In the blink of an eye, she put on a pitiful expression, tears welling up as if they were about to fall, but never did. Richard yelled at Diana with a harsh tone. "Diana, Why are you holding a grudge against a child? He's been bullied before and is already timid. Don't scare him." After saying that, Richard picked the boy up in his arms. The boy chirped, calling out, "Daddy." As soon as the words left his mouth, Diana's son standing next to her teared up. Richard looked momentarily guilty and hastily explained. He doesn't have a father and used to be humiliated by people, getting scared so badly he often has nightmares. So I told him to call me that so he wouldn't feel so sad. "You better stop making excuses," Diana said, her voice as cold as ice. "Your own son is standing right here. After being apart for so many days, have you hugged him even once? You've been away from home for half a year? I already knew I was pregnant back then. By now, the baby would have been quite big. Yet my stomach is flat, now where is the baby? And yet, you don't care at all." Passers-by began to stop and watch the commotion. Richard started to panic and tried to change the subject. "Diana, why aren't you at home taking care of my mother? What are you doing running all the way here?" "I came to catch a cheating husband," Diana said sharply and decisively. As if triggered, Richard swung his hand and slapped Diana hard across the face. Her ears rang, her vision went dark, and she felt dizzy and disoriented. Not knowing where she found the strength, she still managed to stand firm. Her son used his frail body to support her. Diana snapped back and slapped Richard back fiercely. Richard's hair became a messed-up tangle, completely losing his former refined, scholarly appearance. The scene became so loud that pedestrians began gathering around to watch. Panic clearly appeared on Richard's pretend elegant face. "All right, Diana, things happened too suddenly today. I admit I was wrong," he said. "You're covered in mud. Let me take you to the guest house to wash up a bit." Diana let out a cold laugh. "You're not taking me to your home to wash up?" Richard's face showed embarrassment, while Claire was clearly unhappy, as if Diana were trying to intrude on their private territory. Richard pointed to a building along the road and coaxed her with a softened tone. "This is the guest house of the Geological Survey Bureau. We have hot water 247 here. Just stay here for now, and wash up so you can feel comfortable. If we go home now, I'd still have to boil water, and it's far. Just stay here for now." It was working hours at the staff quarters, so there weren't many people passing by. It wasn't the right time for her to make a huge scene. Staying temporarily at the guest house was a reasonable choice. Diana bathed herself and her son, and afterward, they went to buy some food. Watching her son eat ravenously, her heart sank. He ate while silently shedding tears, and turned to say to her, "Mom, these steamed rice rolls are so good. It's a pity that my little sister doesn't get to eat them." Diana's face remained as cold as iron, but her voice was gentle. "Very soon. In the future, both you and your sister will live good days." She was waiting for the end of the workday at the staff quarters. Earlier, it was the gate guard who had called Richard over. This time, she wanted to block him right at the gate of the Survey Bureau's compound to expose his vile deeds in front of everyone. After that, she would go to his superiors. Just as her emotions were boiling over, a loudspeaker broadcast suddenly echoed throughout the compound. "The new group commendation ceremony is about to begin. Will all relevant personnel please take their seats quickly? We invite the leadership comrades to the stage." Diana's heart immediately stirred. She grabbed the hand of her son, Ethan, and strode quickly away from there, heading straight toward the source of the loudspeaker's voice. Her steps grew more hurried with every pace. At the Survey Bureau's stadium, a stage had been set up right in the center of the stands. After the leadership speeches, the individuals being commended took turns stepping up to share their thoughts. Richard was the third person to be called. He was clearly dressed impeccably. Already possessing a handsome, scholarly appearance, he now looked even more the part of a successful man. Diana scoffed coldly in her heart, desperately wanting to drag a man like him right back down into the mud. Richard gave a summary of his work for a while, and then began his acknowledgments. "Thank you to the leadership for this recognition. I will continue to work hard. I would also like to thank my colleague, Claire, for always supporting me in my work. Without her, I wouldn't be where I am today. Thank you to the Bureau's leadership for helping to arrange a position for Claire, allowing me to focus on my work with peace of mind." Down in the audience, someone joked loudly, "So, when's the wedding?" This was followed by a chorus of good-natured laughter. A hint of awkwardness appeared on Richard's face. At that moment, Claire, who had been standing right below the stage, stepped up and said calmly, "Engineer Richard and I are just colleagues. I am the widow of his late student. Richard just wanted to help me out. Once I can stand on my own 2 feet, he will bring his wife here to join him." A brief silence fell over the audience. Diana slowly walked up onto the stage. Looking at that despicable pair, she spoke in a cold, indifferent tone. "Are you sure he's going to bring me here?" Seeing her, Claire was stunned. "Diana?" Diana turned to face the audience and spoke slowly. I am the person she just mentioned. The one who engineer Richard is supposedly going to bring over once she can stand on her own 2 feet. I am his legal wife. Under the bewildered gazes of the crowd, Diana remained completely unfazed. Tell me, everyone, does it look like engineer Richard really intends to bring me here? He inferred I'd been away from home for half a year without sending a single letter or a single dime back. When he left, I was pregnant, yet he hasn't bothered to ask about me even once. When he left, his mother fell ill, and he ignored that too, leaving me entirely alone to take care of a sick, elderly woman. At this point, Richard finally snapped out of his shock and tried to argue back. I left you $30 before I left. Ha, that was exactly what Diana had been waiting for him to say. She continued, her voice clear and articulate. Everyone here is family of the Survey Bureau staff. You all know that our agency provides fieldwork allowances, has housing accommodations everywhere, and even has cafeterias. Let me ask you, whose household only has a mere $30 in savings? My family used to have several $100s in savings, along with a stack of food ration coupons. But from the moment Claire stepped into our home, it took less than half a year for all that wealth to be spent on her. They called it helping a family in need, but her food, clothing, and everything she used had to be top of the line. Later on, when the house ran out of money, Richard even started eyeing the money meant for my children's milk and eggs. Finally, Richard became so humiliated that it turned to rage. He yelled, "You're speaking nonsense. You're slandering me." He stepped forward, intending to drag her off the stage, but it was already too late. His best chance to stop her had been earlier. Because he had underestimated her, he had missed the golden window of opportunity. Diana paid no mind to his actions and continued speaking. Which part of what I said is a lie? The post office has records of every letter and every money transfer sent. If you can produce them, bring them right here. I'll stand here and wait. As for saying, you eyed the kids' milk money, my son Ethan is standing right here. Do you think a mother like me would dare make up stories in front of her own child? Furthermore, ever since Claire came to our house, our milk subscription immediately doubled into 2 portions. Look at her clothes, her shoes, her watch, they're all brand new. Just a rough estimate shows it must have cost a fortune. These are things anyone can see. It's no secret. Finally, when you left the house, you said you were leaving me $30. According to you, that was an advance on your salary. Whether that's true or not, the Bureau's finance department is right here. They can verify it. Down in the audience, whispers and discussions broke out. No one from the finance department stood up to refute her claims, which meant she was telling the truth. Diana continued to press her advantage. Richard, my monthly salary is only $35. Your sick parents alone cost $20. With the remaining $15, I, a pregnant woman, have to raise 2 young children. Where is your conscience? Richard was completely flustered by now. Unable to maintain his composure, he grabbed her, intending to drag her off the stage. There's a misunderstanding here. Let's go home and talk about it. Claire was cunning indeed. She managed to keep a clear head even now. She sighed softly and spoke slowly. Diana, from the moment I stepped into your house, you never liked me. I know you were jealous. But at that time, I truly had nowhere else to go and had to rely on others. I've put up with you for a long time too. Richard's face was as white as a sheet. He opened his mouth to defend himself. I just wanted to help a colleague. Maybe I went a bit too far in some regards, but my intentions were good. He clumsily tried to make himself look like the good guy, hoping to deflect attention. At this moment, Claire spoke up again. It's true, I spent some of your family's money. I was really struggling back then. But later on, my late husband's family sent me money. You can't just count everything as your family's relief funds. This move of hers was a direct strike at the root, completely pulling the rug out from under Diana. But Diana was someone who had been reborn. This was her God-given advantage. She had long since thoroughly investigated Claire's true background. A strange smile appeared on Diana's lips, a smile that sent a shiver down Claire's spine, making her shudder. Diana spoke slowly and calmly. Richard, when you brought Claire home, you said it was out of loyalty to your student, Colin. You said Colin had helped you a lot, so you wanted to repay his kindness by taking care of his widow. Is that right? Richard finally managed to muster a bit of his bravado and replied, Yeah, that was true then, and it's still true now. Diana let out a cold laugh. But I've already visited Colin's family. Colin's parents, though both ill, are still alive. Claire's elegant, composed facade finally began to crack. Diana suddenly burst into laughter, a laugh containing a certainty of victory that outsiders couldn't understand. She delivered the fatal blow, her voice lowered, every word clear. Yet Colin's parents have never received a single word of concern from you. Don't tell me repaying a debt of gratitude requires picking targets. Did you only want to repay his wife? Richard's face instantly twisted as he roared, Diana, stop making malicious accusations. At this point, a leader stepped forward, unable to bear watching the scene any longer. Family matters can just be misunderstandings. Just go home and talk it out clearly. Immediately after, someone stepped up, intending to pull Diana off the stage. Claire, as if unable to bear the humiliation, covered her face with her hands, choked back sobs, burst into tears, and turned to run off the stage. Just then, someone in the audience shouted loudly at the leader who was trying to mediate, Leonard, you're out there messing around with other women yourself, and now you dare stand up there and defend people like them? I'm going to tear you apart. After saying that, the woman lunged toward the stage, though luckily someone held her back in time. Leonard, the mediating leader from earlier, could only shake his head and sigh, eventually sitting back down in silence. Diana shoved away the hand of the person pulling her, turned toward Claire, who was about to flee, and shouted, Stop right there! What are you running for? A guilty conscience? Sure enough, Claire stopped in her tracks. Diana yelled at the top of her lungs, Listen closely, everyone. I personally went to Colin's hometown. Colin's parents told me that their daughter-in-law, Claire, when Colin was misunderstood, she was the one who wrote the letter of denunciation and sent it to his unit, fabricating lies and framing him. Colin was supposed to be released soon, but that very letter almost sent him to prison, and he ultimately died in the detention center. As soon as the words left her mouth, the entire venue was shell-shocked. No one could maintain their composure anymore, and murmurs of disbelief erupted all over the stands. Claire weakly argued back, You're making this up. Diana delivered another fatal blow. It was Colin's supervisor, who told his parents about this. Anyone here can go and verify it themselves. I was the one who personally took his parents to the agency to confirm it time and time again. I take full responsibility for every single word I say. Just as she finished speaking, Claire fainted on the spot. Richard was about to step forward to check on her, but he hesitated, not daring to take another step. Diana turned to interrogate him. Richard, I found out about that denunciation letter as soon as I looked into it. Are you telling me you didn't know? Or did you know perfectly well, but turned a blind eye just because you liked Claire? Could it even be that you two had conspired together all along, framing your own student just to steal another man's wife? Finally, Richard completely lost his mind. Before he could even defend himself, Diana lunged forward and delivered a swift kick to him. He completely collapsed, tumbling to the ground. Now, his whole body was covered in mud, looking no different than she had earlier. At that moment, the highest-ranking leader of the Survey Bureau, Director Lewis, stepped up and said to her, Diana, most of what you've said makes sense and is backed by clear evidence. However, because this matter has major implications, we still need to continue verifying the facts. Furthermore, I ask that you refrain from making certain speculations public to avoid causing a negative impact internally. Can you do that? Diana was already very grateful that the director had the patience to let her speak this far. If he had intended to cover things up, she would never have had the chance to expose Richard in front of everyone. Therefore, she smiled in satisfaction and left the stage. Diana and Richard were both taken to a mediation room. Director Lewis personally stepped in to handle the matter. He said to her, Diana, I've heard that you are a very capable and hardworking woman. Now that things have blown up like this, do you have any specific demands? Diana replied calmly, I request that the administration approve my divorce from Richard and divide the assets to give me the share I deserve. She knew that whatever money he had was already squandered by Claire, but he could get an advance on his salary. In the future, no matter what position he held, his employment status would remain intact, which meant the Bureau could absolutely help enforce this. Director Lewis nodded. Diana continued, To satisfy Claire's materialistic needs, Richard abandoned even his own biological mother. Therefore, I demand full custody of our 2 children. At the same time, Richard must be obligated to pay child support. At this point, an HR officer sitting nearby chimed in. You're supposed to spend your whole lives together. Don't just bring up divorce at the drop of a hat. Look at how many couples actually get divorced, almost none. Don't they all just grit their teeth and keep going in the end? Ma'am, you're being far too ruthless by doing this. Diana stated resolutely, Even if there is only one person out there who gets a divorce, I will be that person. Before Richard came here, you only heard a few passing remarks about how much he favored Claire at home. You don't understand the whole truth. Richard, who had been sitting with his head down in silence, suddenly looked up, his eyes full of anguish. He pleaded, Diana, I know I was wrong. I was just deceived. Can you please forgive me this one time? Diana shook her head. You weren't deceived. You willingly let yourself be deceived. It's because you liked Claire that you were so easily bewitched by her. Not to mention the matter of framing Colin, I still haven't found out whether you had a hand in it or not. Richard instantly became agitated and yelled, Diana, do you really see me as someone that despicable? Diana nodded. Yes, and even worse than that. After that, she went on to present to the leadership more of the events that had unfolded ever since Claire stepped into her home, and she resolutely maintained her demand for a divorce. At that time, Claire had been in her home for 3 months, yet still always treated herself like a guest. Every single morning, just like the children, she expected eggs and milk. On that particular morning, there were no eggs left in Claire's bowl, nor was there any milk. Looking at the bowl of plain porridge in front of her, Claire's eyes turned red. Richard immediately noticed, and, with a heavy slam of his bowl onto the table, his face flushed red as he glared at Diana and interrogated her. Diana, is this how you treat a guest? Diana could only sigh as she set down her bowl. No matter how skilled someone is at cooking, it's hard to make a meal when there's no rice left. Richard, I've already told you beforehand that the family is out of money, and even the food ration coupons are gone. How am I supposed to buy eggs? Richard was so angry that his chest heaved up and down continuously. Diana continued, when your father was alive, he established the rule that the best things in the house should be prioritized for the children. Eggs were for the daughter, and milk was for the son that never changed. Good grade of rice rations was limited, so giving Claire plain porridge was already me trying my absolute best. She ate plain porridge, you ate a mix of white rice and millet, and I could only eat coarse whole-grain buckwheat noodles. Preparing 3 different meals for a single breakfast means I have to get up at 5 in the morning. If you still consider this place a home, you should also learn to think of me for once. Claire covered her face and ran outside in tears. Her sincere words had ended up being twisted into her bullying Claire. Richard glared at Diana with fury in his eyes and hurriedly rushed out after her. He dragged Claire back and forced her to sit down at the dining table. Because it was the weekend, the 2 children woke up later. Just as they finished washing their faces and were getting ready to sit down and eat, right in front of the kids, Richard picked up their daughter Lily's half-eaten egg, peeled off the shell, broke it in half, and handed one half to Claire. Then, he took half of their son Ethan's carton of milk, poured it into a glass, and placed it in front of Claire. He turned to Claire and smiled gently. It's fine. Go ahead and eat. In this house, I call the shots. Claire also flashed a lovely, charming smile and leisurely ate the children's portion, not forgetting to shoot Diana a provocative glance. Lily, having half of her egg taken away, immediately burst into tears. Diana didn't have time to scold anyone and could only comfort her child first. Ethan also walked over to Diana with reddened eye rims. That day, Diana took the kids back to her parents' home. Richard came looking for her, promising over and over again that he would send Claire away before Diana finally agreed to follow him back home. The moment they stepped through the door, Richard's expression completely changed. He gave Diana a hard push and said in an exasperated voice, making a fussle you ever know how to do, is cause trouble. I truly brought a living deity back into my home. Diana coldly shot back. That living deity is currently lying right there in the master bedroom, living and dining like a VIP guest, yet acting just as entitled as the master of the house. Richard's expression froze for a moment, but he quickly regained his arrogant demeanor. I knew you couldn't stand the sight of her. You were just pretending to be generous. I'm saying that if I were actually pretending to be generous, would I have let her squander all the family's money? If I were truly generous, should I have just sold myself off as well? Richard impatiently waved his hand. I'm not arguing with you anymore. Housewives like you are always best at making a mountain out of a molehill. He paused for a moment, then put on a conciliatory tone. To tell you the truth, wanting to resolve this isn't impossible. You just need to go and ask for back the $8 we pay your mother for babysitting, and that'll be that. At that time, their son Ethan had already started kindergarten, and their daughter Lily was still little, so Diana's mother helped look after her. Diana gave her mother $8 every month, a very common practice back then. Diana gave a cold laugh. If you're so capable, go talk to my mother yourself. She added, the neighbors are already gossiping about you two. They knew you two had no shame, but they never imagined you could be shameless to this degree. Or should I explain it clearly to them? Diana had challenged. Richard's face had turned beet red. Have you been gossiping with the neighborhood women again? Diana had laughed coldly. Why aren't they gossiping about me? Richard choked on his words. It took a moment before he managed to calm himself down and say, I won't stoop to the level of gossips like you. Then, changing his tone, as if offering a solution, he added, actually, there is a permanent way to solve this. You give your job to Claire, and you stay home to take care of the kids. From now on, I won't pay any attention to her anymore. We will completely cut ties. What do you think? He knew perfectly well how precious a job was in those days. Diana froze at his sheer audacity. Mistaking her shock for hesitation, he continued to persuade her. If we're going to help, let's help all the way. Regardless, I need to make sure she can earn a living for herself. Aren't you upset about the relationship between her and me? Now the solution is clear. If you don't agree, then don't stop me from helping others in the future. Diana took a deep breath. This job was left to me by my father. He retired early just so I could take his place. Richard waved his hand impatiently, annoyed. People have to make choices in life. You can't have everything your way. Right when Diana and Richard were in the middle of this intense argument, a transfer order came down from above. Richard was reassigned to work in the big city, leaving the small county town. He was an employee of the survey bureau who had been working there, and they had met through a matchmaker. By rights, Diana should have followed him to the city, and the bureau would have arranged a job for her according to regulations. But unexpectedly, taking advantage of their Cold War, Richard took it upon himself to bring Claire along with him. Right before leaving, he coldly told Diana, "It's easier to arrange jobs in the big city. I'll take Claire there first, and I'll come back for you later. Stay home, be good, and reflect on your behavior." Diana had asked him, "I'm pregnant. Don't you have any arrangements for me?" Richard replied with an icy tone, "Now, you remember I'm your husband and want to rely on me? Aren't you so capable? You spent all day bad-mouthing me behind my back with the neighbors. Why don't you ask them to help you?" With that, he lowered his head and focused on packing his bags. Before they left, Diana overheard him talking to Claire, his words full of excitement and dreams about the big city. They even talked about her. Richard said, "Diana is famous for being hardworking, but to be blunt, she is just destined for a life of toil. Following me to the big city, she doesn't have that kind of blessing." The conversation paused for a moment. Then, as if wanting to cover something up, he added, "It's good to leave her alone for a while. Let her calm down." What exactly that good meant, Richard didn't say. But at that moment, Diana had an ominous premonition. He was never coming back for her. However, after being reborn, Diana had no desire whatsoever to reunite with him. All she wanted was to take back the share of the assets that belonged to her, and then go find her brother-in-law. In a few years, his factory would undergo privatization, and all the workers would receive original shares. Some people would sell those shares because they were short on money, and she had to buy them up. The following year, when those original shares went public, their value would increase more than tenfold. Even if she didn't buy them, someone else would make a move. In her previous life, a bunch of shady opportunists had scooped up all those shares. In this life, it was her turn to strike. She needed that money as the stepping stone for everything. Diana almost choked back tears as she recounted her family's situation at that time. The HR officer was starting to find it unbearable as well, his eyebrows knitting tighter and tighter. With a cold face, he asked Richard, "Engineer Richard, is it true that you proposed having your wife give up her job for Claire?" Seeing the situation turning against him, Richard's face flushed red, and he stammered, I. Director Lewis also fell into deep thought, his expression grim. Richard showed a clear look of pleading. "Director, I really was just momentarily foolish. I had no intention of abandoning my wife, the loyal wife who stood by me through thick and thin." Diana let out a cold laugh. "Since when did I become the loyal wife who stood by you through thick and thin? I graduated from high school and work as a pattern maker at the garment factory. I am a level 6 technical worker. If I hadn't been busy having children these past few years, I would be a deputy manager by now, and my salary would have gone up by at least 2 pay grades." Richard's face grew even redder. I didn't mean it that way." The situation was leaning entirely in Diana's favor when, right at that moment, Leonard the leader, who had just been exposed by his own wife in front of the crowd earlier, walked in. He took a sip of water and cast a sideways glance at Richard. The two exchanged a fleeting look before Leonard spoke up. "Diana, we understand you've suffered a lot of grievances, but you should also be magnanimous and give him a chance to correct his mistakes." Diana felt her heart sink, turning icy cold. Leonard slammed his water glass onto the table, his voice heavy as lead. "Not beating a man down with a single strike, that has always been our working principle. We understand your suffering, and the leadership will hold a meeting to discuss this further." After saying his piece, he turned around and walked out. Director Lewis watched his departing back, then turned to Diana and said, "Diana, Leonard is the deputy director in charge of human resources. We have to take his opinions into consideration. But we must be fair in our work, so please rest assured." The HR officer sitting nearby also shot her a look, signaling her, and said in a soft voice, "Diana, the policy of freedom of marriage is still in effect. Your request will not be ignored. Just wait a little longer. The agency needs time for mediation." Richard darted his eyes around, his expression constantly changing. He frowned and said, "Diana and I still have feelings for each other. She's just angry for the moment. Once she calms down, everything will be fine again." Taking advantage of the moment when no one was paying attention, Diana stepped forward and slapped him again, so hard that his face was knocked completely to one side and his eyes grew red and swollen. Richard glared at her in disbelief. Diana spat right in his face and scolded him coldly. "You have an affair, come home and bully your wife and children, and now that you see things going badly for you, you want me to forgive you? Keep dreaming. I wouldn't forgive you even if you died." Richard's face was full of grievance, but he didn't dare to lose his temper. Director Lewis turned to Diana and said, "Deputy Director Leonard's point is that this matter still requires further mediation. In any case, we can't reach a conclusion today. Just wait a little longer." Richard lowered his head and said, sounding deeply wronged, "Director, I don't want a divorce." Diana let out a cold laugh. "You don't want a divorce because you're afraid of being branded as morally bankrupt, aren't you? Let me tell you straight. The longer you drag this out, the more I will expose you in front of your colleagues every single day. There are still many things I haven't even recalled yet. Slowly but surely, I will bring up every single one of them." At this point, Richard didn't even bother hiding it anymore, staring fixedly at her with a distinctly dark and sinister look. Diana didn't shy away either, staring back at him with a gaze full of venom. She continued speaking to the leaders. Deputy Director Leonard's wife just stood up and exposed her own husband. It's obvious that Leonard and Richard are cut from the exact same cloth. Letting someone like him be in charge of this, I refuse to accept it. I will take this to the Women's Association. Director Lewis gently patted Diana's shoulder, his voice soft and reassuring. "Diana, don't be hasty. In a few days, we will definitely give you a satisfactory answer. As leadership, we also don't want this matter to spread further and cause a negative impact. I will personally speak with Deputy Director Leonard." Even though the leaders had said that, as long as she wasn't divorced yet, Diana's heart could not be at peace. She reminded herself to control her temper and stay calm so that the situation would continue to lean in her favor. Thinking of this, she suddenly remembered the watch on Claire's wrist. Richard had personally taken her to buy it. She had to get that back. At present, Claire was probably still at Richard's place. The Survey Bureau had arranged a job for her at a subordinate unit, and her personnel files had likely been transferred already. Without a letter of introduction, she couldn't go anywhere. With this in mind, Diana immediately stood up and said, "In that case, I will go back first and wait for news. If I leave my child alone for too long, he'll be scared. Tomorrow, I will come back to the bureau and sit right here to wait for the result." The HR officer tried hard to hold back a smile. Diana received her son back from the Women's Association officer, thanked her profusely, and then followed Richard home. Fearing that Diana might cause a massive scene, the Women's Association officer also quietly tagged along. On the way, Richard tried to strike up a conversation several times, but Diana ignored him. Only one thing he said caught her attention. He had given up his assigned unit apartment to Claire and her son, while he himself stayed in the agency's staff dormitory. Diana thought to herself, "Perfect. Coming here now is the perfect time to catch the snake right in its den." Together, they arrived at the place Richard called home. The moment the door opened, Claire's son immediately rushed out and threw himself into Richard's arms, crying out loudly, "Daddy, I'm so scared. Mommy is crying so hard." Richard sighed. He turned to look at Diana, but didn't dare say a word. Stepping inside, the furniture and decorations in the house were all things Diana had never seen before. Sure enough, just as Richard had said, the big city was indeed a place to enjoy life. It was just that he hadn't wanted to share it with her. During their 6 years of marriage, she had been frugal, maintained the household, been a dutiful daughter-in-law, and raised their children. She couldn't understand why she wasn't worthy. In her previous life, she had desperately wanted to ask him, was it really that easy to abandon your wife and children? But at this very moment, as she actually stood in the home she had previously only dared to dream of, she no longer wanted to ask. The only thing on her mind right now was, how much is all this stuff worth? Suddenly, Diana lunged forward, stepping right in front of Claire. She reached out, snatched the watch right off Claire's wrist, and shoved it into her own pocket. Claire was weeping bitterly, tears streaming down her face, while secretly observing Richard's expression. Before Claire could even react, Diana unpinned the brooch from her chest as well. Not stopping there, Diana ran over, pulled open the wardrobe, and dragged out Claire's coat along with several pieces of high-quality fabric. After that, she feigned awkwardness, turned her head, and spoke to the Women's Association officer who had come along. "I agreed to provide her with food and lodging, but I never gave permission to buy her expensive things. These things, when it comes down to it, were obtained through her scheming. Naturally, I have to take them back. Then, her eyes turned red as she continued to explain. Our family is short on money. I can't even secure the kids' next meal. When I came here, aside from dumping me at the guest house, Richard didn't even bother to buy a single meal for our child. The money used to buy all this came from our family's living expenses, while the kids and I didn't even have enough to eat at home. Diana saw that the Women's Association officer's eyes were also red. The officer immediately chimed in. Take them. Sell them to buy nourishing food for your children. I'm sure Engineer Richard wouldn't object. They all simultaneously turned to look at Richard. Right at that moment, his hand, which was about to rest on Claire's shoulder, froze in midair. Claire's face was covered in tears and snot, making her look incredibly pitiful. She cried as she said, Richard, I didn't frame Colin. I just wanted to cut ties with him. I was so scared back then. Someone instigated it, and my mind was all muddled, which is why I... Diana laughed coldly, her voice full of mockery. Right. Your mind was muddled, so you got your husband killed, and then ran off to leech off another man. Then that man's mind also got muddled, so he abandoned his wife and kids. The Women's Association officer couldn't help but laugh along. Diana added another remark. So it turns out both of you have easily muddled minds. Truly a match made in heaven. Diana tilted her head up and stared blankly at the ceiling. This house was clean, fully furnished, affluent, and comfortable. It truly didn't fit the image of a haggard, laboring woman like her at all. But a person's worth was never measured by these things. Since childhood, Diana had been taught differently. Even so, these things proved a person's capability. She wasn't greedy for those material possessions, but she wanted to have the ability to attain them herself. Not wanting to take something and not being able to take it were two very different things. The Women's Association officer, worried they would cause another scene, advised Richard to just sleep at the dormitory for the night and talk things over the next day. As for Diana, she tossed and turned all night, unable to sleep. Suddenly, she remembered that there was definitely someone else who was just as sleepless as she was right now. She decided to go see her. Diana went to the guest house where Claire was temporarily staying. As soon as Claire saw Diana walk in, the haughty air she had maintained in front of her for the past half a year instantly vanished. Diana didn't stand on ceremony. She plopped down on a chair and cut straight to the chase without beating around the bush. You still have a way to turn this around right now. Claire looked up at her in astonishment, momentarily stunned. In Claire's mind, she was the smart one, while Diana was just a fool who was always led around by the nose. She stammered. Are you actually going to help me? Diana couldn't be bothered to put on an act either. She stretched her legs and shoulders comfortably, then replied, If it benefits me, I don't mind helping you. Then, she gave a half smile, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Anyway, even if I don't lift a finger, you and Richard are going to go into a freefall sooner or later. Claire's face instantly turned pale. Diana reminded her, if you just sit here waiting to die, it's highly likely that Richard will figure out a way to save his own skin, leaving you doomed beyond redemption. Claire pursed her lips, her dry, cracked lips trembling for a long time without being able to utter a word. Diana laughed coldly, a smile that was both sinister and chilling. How far have you and Richard gone? She reacted as if pricked by a needle. We are innocent. Diana cut her off immediately. Think carefully. Claire froze, reflexively asking back. Think carefully? Think about what? Diana just smiled, but didn't answer. Early the next morning, Diana went to the reception desk of the survey bureau. Unexpectedly, Claire had arrived even earlier. She had just finished meeting with the leadership and was walking out. They crossed paths without either of them saying a word, but both knew exactly what was going on in their hearts. The leadership sent a secretary out to receive Diana, who said in a polite tone, Diana, there's no need to talk today. Just go back and wait for the news. Diana immediately understood that the matter was practically settled. In the end, people always have to save themselves. She immediately went to the private second-hand market, found some dealers, and sold off all the items from the house, including Claire's watch. She exchanged them for several $100s in cash. Holding the money in her hand, Diana felt remarkably relieved. On her way back, Diana happened to spot Richard and Claire talking in a small alley near the guest house. She scoffed coldly in her heart. These two used to live in the same house without caring in the slightest about gossip, and now they knew to be afraid of people's judging eyes. She quietly crept closer, only to hear Richard's low, resentful voice. What on earth did you tell the leaders? Why was I temporarily suspended from work? Claire, looking both aggrieved and long-suffering, said, I just told the truth. I said that I like you. You treat me so well, so you definitely have feelings for me too. What else could I possibly say? Richard's voice trembled. You said what? You said such shameful things to the leaders? Claire burst into tears. Richard, Aren't we great together? I really didn't mean to harm Colin. Who gets married hoping for a miserable life? Doesn't everyone want a better life? Richard said, You call that being smart? No. That's throwing someone under the bus. I wouldn't dare live with you. Other things might be negotiable, but this point alone terrifies me. I'm afraid that one day I'll end up just like Colin. The moment I get misunderstood, you'll immediately. Claire broke down wailing. Who hasn't made mistakes? Richard, are you saying you've never made a mistake? Richard asked suspiciously, Where did I go wrong? At most, I misjudged a person. Claire bit her lip, hesitating for a moment before saying, But the administration said you have an improper relationship with a woman. The suspicion in Richard's eyes deepened. What exactly did you report to them? Claire repeated her previous line. I just told the truth. I said, You have feelings for me. What? Richard turned pale and exclaimed in horror. How could you say that? When did I ever? Claire lowered her head, speaking with a mix of shyness and boldness. That time you were drunk, you kissed me, and then... Before she could finish her sentence, Richard hastily covered her mouth with his hand. As soon as he let go, he immediately asked, looking like he was backed into a corner, Did you tell the administration about that too? Claire nodded. I didn't dare hide anything. Richard asked, trembling. Did you voluntarily report it to the administration? Claire shook her head. They were the ones who sought me out. Richard closed his eyes, then slowly opened them. Finally, as if realizing there was no way out, he lowered his head, completely accepting his fate. The administration finally approved Diana's divorce from Richard. All of the conditions were granted exactly according to her requests. Diana left that place with over $1,500 in her pocket. In her heart, she knew with crystal clarity that Claire had definitely told the leadership more than what she had admitted. Whether it was true or false, Claire had certainly found a way to firmly establish the relationship between herself and Richard, because Diana herself had secretly hinted for her to do exactly that the other night. By saying those things, Claire had tied herself to Richard, while Richard was completely nailed down with the label of moral corruption, his future prospects shattered. Keeping his current position was already a stroke of immense luck. Diana didn't want him to be demoted too severely, because he still had to pay her a very high amount of child support. As for the mistakes Claire had made, someone else would naturally step in to deal with them. Those things would become clear in the future. As for whether that despicable couple would eventually end up together, Diana couldn't care less. Diana took her children and her parents to the city where her sister-in-law lived, ready to start a brand new life. She had contacted her sister-in-law in advance, who had helped her rent a house. Regarding work, her father used to feel that divorce was a shameful thing, so he had put all his effort into helping her leave their hometown. See, as long as you know how to strive for yourself, there will always be someone willing to lend a helping hand. In the past, Diana thought her father would see her as a disgrace and wouldn't let her return home. But in reality, there were still many ways to stay away from the gossip and drama. For the sake of his grandchildren, he still accepted and tolerated her. There was also another reason. She had shown them her savings account book. The amount of money in it had left the whole family astounded. While she lost her status as an official worker, she also showed them the hope that she could protect herself. Food ration coupons were gradually being phased out. The times were about to change. Her parents finally stopped, stubbornly clinging to their old ways of thinking. Their support was crucial. The timing of her rebirth hadn't been entirely favorable. Her children were already born. Without her parents' help, her path forward would have been incredibly arduous. Diana had been reborn right after undergoing an abortion procedure. At that time, the doctor had even scheduled an appointment for her to get an IUD inserted, but she kept bleeding endlessly. One day, after a fierce argument with her mother-in-law, she fainted by the side of the road. She dreamed a very long dream, a dream so realistic it was terrifying. She believed that was her previous life. In the dream, Richard indeed never came back for her. He just vaguely and coldly dragged her along through the years. She had to take care of her hot-tempered mother-in-law, arguing every day over trivial matters. She raised her children alone, exhausting her mind and body. When the wave of layoffs hit, she was among the first group to lose her job, making life incredibly difficult. Meanwhile, Richard, untethered by children, striving with all his might and getting promoted continuously. Every time he returned to visit his hometown, he was surrounded by flatterers. Even the county leaders tagged along to welcome him. His car would stop at the end of the alley, and he would walk the rest of the way home. On the way, upon seeing Diana, he acted as if she were invisible. She was pushed to the ground by the surging crowd. He merely paused for a split second before turning his face away, not even offering a hand to help her up. At that time, Diana had thought that even if she were a total stranger, a person of status seeing a woman fall on the street would at least step forward and pretend to help her up. if only out of basic courtesy. Yet, he didn't even bother to fake that thin veneer of morality. So, after that incident, Diana decided to go to the city where he lived and find his workplace. But by then, Richard had firmly planted his roots. Even when she brought people along to scold him for not paying child support, they were ultimately easily chased away. Her youth was tormented by Richard's cruelty and betrayal until they were in their 40s. Only when times changed and society progressed did he finally agree to a divorce, and even then, he schemed to force her to leave empty-handed. In the end, he married Claire in a grand, spectacular fashion, as if it were perfectly legitimate. Therefore, after being reborn, the very first thing Diana had to do was expose those two despicable pieces of trash, ensuring they could never hold their heads high again. As for other matters, they could be temporarily set aside. Once she achieved fame and success, they would settle the debts of both lifetimes all at once. Her sister-in-law's unit was a bearing manufacturing plant, completely unrelated to Diana's field of expertise. But she was diligent and ambitious, willing to learn, so she started over from scratch. She worked as a fitter, toiling away in the factory, starting with the most physically demanding manual labor. In the evenings, thanks to her parents helping look after the kids, she attended night school for college, majoring in English. With persistent effort, just a few years later, her English proficiency had visibly excelled. Finally, rumors about the factory's privatization began to circulate, and the workers buzzed with gossip. One day, the other shoe finally dropped. The factory officially announced that internal shares would be distributed to each worker. Some workers in difficult financial situations didn't want to accept them. They needed cash more. Others mistakenly believed that the shares were meant to replace their bonuses, which made them object even more. Later, to quell the public outcry, the factory leadership agreed that anyone who wanted to transfer their shares was free to do so. Diana stepped forward and told the leadership directly, if the factory could give her a permanent staff position, she was willing to buy up all the shares that everyone else didn't want. The request for a permanent position was just a smokescreen. Her true goal was to buy the shares. As a temporary worker, whenever the factory wasn't too busy, Diana often asked for time off to travel down south to get merchandise, selling fashion clothing at the local market. People saw her constantly bustling about, refusing to settle down, and no one understood what she was pursuing. Someone asked her, didn't she want to live a little more peacefully? Of course she didn't want to live peacefully. In her previous life, she had lived far too peacefully. Peaceful but impoverished, peaceful but buried alive in a draining marriage, what was so good about that? But outwardly, she still smiled gently and said, I still have elderly parents and young children to take care of, the burden is very heavy. And so, everyone sympathized and understood her. As for the factory leadership, they just turned a blind eye to her frequent requests for time off and let it go. Thanks to this, the money she had accumulated had soon multiplied many times over. Her stepping forward to buy the shares that others didn't want was no small matter. It was a massive sum of money. Everyone knew she was doing business on the side, but no one thought she had accumulated that much wealth. Everyone was astounded. Just at that moment, Diana produced her divorce certificate with Richard. The notes section detailing the division of assets was clearly listed on it. To resolve the immediate issue, the factory leadership promised her that if there were ever a quota for official permanent positions in the future, they would definitely give her priority. And so, Diana successfully collected those crucial shares. Back then, the stock exchange hadn't been established yet, so the shares in her hands were still paper certificates, with her name clearly written in the owner's section. Diana hugged that pile of stock certificates to her chest, completely satisfied. After that, she continued to stay at the factory for a while longer. But by this time, people had started to get jealous of her. Using the excuse that she wasn't getting along with her colleagues, Diana voluntarily resigned and went back to doing business. Another year passed, and the Shanghai Stock Exchange officially opened. When the shares in her hands increased tenfold in value, she immediately sold them all. Following that, she traveled to the Jiangsu, Zhejiang, and Shanghai regions to conduct market research. After making her rounds and returning, she began preparing to apply for a visa. It was also at this moment that she realized the money she had on hand still wasn't enough to do import-export business. At the time, she had 100,000 yuan. In her hometown, that was a massive sum of money, but when she actually started preparing to apply for a visa, she discovered that an international plane ticket alone cost over 10,000 yuan. Doing foreign trade wasn't as easy as she had thought. However, during her market research in the Jiangsu and Zhejiang areas, she had seen quite a few foreigners looking for suppliers. She could sense that they were completely clueless about the lay of the land and were just blindly groping around. That very fact made her even more steadfast in her determination to earn US dollars. Doing foreign trade well could definitely change her life. Where to start? Finally, she came up with a slightly foolish method. She utilized her foreign language advantage, standing at the arrivals gate at the Shanghai airport, holding up a name board to welcome foreigners coming to China to find suppliers. At first, no one believed her, but she persevered day after day. Gradually, clients began to seek her out on their own. She would take them to the factories and receive a commission from the manufacturers. Later on, she established her own foreign trade company. In those days, opening an import-export company required legal entity status and guaranteed capital. She managed to handle all of those requirements on her own. Her business grew increasingly prosperous. Looking back, she suddenly realized that it had been a very long time since she had relied on the memories of her previous life. Being able to reach where she was today was entirely based on her own merits. A few years later, Diana bought a house in Shanghai and even had her own private office. Her life had completely turned a new page. The child support money was transferred directly to her by the labor union at Richard's unit, deducted straight from his salary. Once, the child support transfer was delayed, so she called to urge them. In reality, she didn't lack those few dollars. She simply wanted to make things difficult for Richard. But unexpectedly, during that phone call, she heard an incredibly important piece of news. Years ago, Diana had exposed Richard's mistreatment of his wife and children. From then on, he could barely hold his head high at the survey bureau. Even though he had once been a technical pillar, his colleagues avoided him like the plague, let alone him getting any promotions. Later, during a personnel transfer, he was demoted twice. As time went by, others advanced while he fell behind. The respectful title of Engineer Richard from the past gradually turned into Old Richard. Eventually, the younger generation in the bureau didn't even bother to use his name, just tossing their chins and calling out, "Hey." Unable to bear it any longer, Richard had no choice but to submit a request to be transferred down to a subordinate enterprise of the Survey Bureau, going from a tenured official, turning into an employee of a public institution that operated like a private enterprise. A few years passed, and his unit's business wasn't doing well, so it changed its model, allowing private individuals to buy it out. Hearing this news, Diana immediately brought her children back to the city where Richard lived, under the pretext that their grandmother was gravely ill and she was bringing the grandchildren to see her one last time. But in reality, she wanted to kill two birds with one stone. She could buy the factory at a reasonable price and become Richard's boss. Why wouldn't she do it? She pretended to casually arrange a meeting with the high-ranking leaders of the Survey Bureau. When they found out she intended to buy the factory where Richard worked, everyone was astonished. After hearing her recount that all of her initial startup capital came from the assets divided during their divorce, the leaders all praised her capability and criticized Richard for being a poor judge of character. Logically, as the person in charge of the enterprise during its transition, he should have had priority in buying it. However, no one could beat the price she offered. On the day of handing over the management rights, after many years, Diana once again met Richard. His hair was messy, his face was stiff, and his entire body exuded an aura of utter lethargy and defeat. If she hadn't intervened, he would probably have become the owner of a private factory by now. When someone falls from brilliant hope into the abyss of failure, that feeling is not easy to accept. Seeing her, he froze in his tracks. Richard looked at her with a complicated expression and opened his mouth to ask, "Diana, what are you doing here?" His voice was hoarse, his eyes tired, completely lacking the dashing demeanor he had in her previous life when he returned to their hometown in glory. Diana smiled lightly. "I'm not here to reminisce about the past with you." Richard paused for a moment, a flash of awkwardness crossing his face, and then tried to regain his composure. He spoke, feigning utmost sincerity. "Diana, I admit I was wrong back then. But at that time, there was really nothing shady going on between Claire and me. Besides, over the years, I've already paid the price." Paid the price? Then what about everything she had had to endure in her previous life? Diana just laughed coldly, making no comment. At this moment, the leader of the Survey Bureau spoke up, turning to Richard with a smile and saying, "Old Richard, you never expected this, did you? The person buying your factory is none other than Diana." Richard looked as if he had been struck hard, freezing in shock. At first, he tried to force a polite smile, but just as his mouth opened, he suddenly seemed to realize something. His entire body stiffened. He opened his mouth wide, breathing heavily like a stranded fish pulled out of the water. The leader sighed in admiration. "It truly is a surprise. The frail girl from the past has now achieved such brilliant success." Then he turned and continued, "Well, shake hands with your new boss. From now on, you're no longer under my management. You're under hers." He then joked, "People often joke about being managed by their wives at home, but for you, it's become a reality. After going round and round, you've ended up right back under your ex-wife's command." Richard forced a smile, the corner of his mouth twitching, his expression incredibly unsightly. He stammered, "Congratulations to you." Diana smiled faintly, her cold eyes looking at his pathetic defeat. He hesitated for a moment before asking further, "Where did you get the money?" At this point, the leader of the survey bureau answered for her, his tone full of implication. "Wasn't her initial capital the $800 divided from your assets? How about it? Pretty capable, isn't she?" Richard's face turned completely pale. Diana added, "I must also thank the survey bureau for standing up for me back then." The leader laughed brightly. "It was the right thing to do. We don't wrong a good person, nor do we tolerate a bad one." Pleased with his own words, he let out a hearty laugh. Richard's face, meanwhile, grew gloomier by the second, as if his soul had been drained from his body. He managed to ask one last question. "So, in the future, will my organizational affiliation still belong to the Survey Bureau?" The leader was still smiling as warmly as a spring breeze, but his answer was as cold as ice. "Of course not. From now on, you are an employee of a private enterprise, under the authority of General Manager Diana." Richard's body swayed as he asked in disbelief, "That's impossible. I'm a tenured employee of a public institution." The leader explained patiently, "Not anymore. Reform is reform. It always has to go through a painful phase. Old Richard, you're a veteran employee. You should understand that work is work wherever you are, and you can shine anywhere." Richard's lips trembled, but in the end, he couldn't utter another word. The leader walked away. Diana began to take over the operations methodically and systematically. One day, she heard that Leonard the man from all those years ago had also been transferred to an enterprise that just happened to be undergoing privatization as well. She immediately called a friend and told him to participate in that buyout. As a result, Leonard walked right into the exact same disastrous situation as Richard. Later on, Diana had to go to the Survey Bureau to handle some personnel rearrangement matters, and she coincidentally ran right into Leonard. He was standing right outside the leader's office door, cursing and shouting, "I am a tenured official. Why have I now been turned into a hired worker for a private owner?" Before long, he was dragged away by the security team. As he passed by Diana, his bloodshot, dead fish eyes glared fiercely at her. Diana gave a faint, mocking smile. The man who had nearly ruined her grand plans years ago, who had once acted as if he held other people's destinies in his hands and thought he was so formidable, had finally collapsed like an eroded mountain. After finishing the personnel arrangements for the enterprise, Diana began to deal with Richard. He was her deputy manager, in charge of assisting with management. However, wherever he was involved, she would immediately veto it. Wherever he voiced an opinion, she would suppress it. He gradually became completely expendable and irrelevant within the company. He tried to show her goodwill many times, but she coldly rejected him every time. When he asked about how the children were doing, she let Ethan, her son, bring Lily, her daughter, to meet him. The result was that Lily brought an egg with her. Right in front of him, she broke it in half, threw one half on the ground and stomped hard on it, then threw the other half straight at Richard. She said coldly and angrily, "You like eating eggs so much? Then eat your fill." Ethan stepped right up to his face, slapped him hard, and said, "That was on behalf of my mother. I've wanted to do that for a long time." Richard's face was knocked to the side by the slap. He looked at Ethan in astonishment and tried to defend himself. "All this time, I've still been sending child support on time. And back then, it was your mother who asked for the divorce first, wasn't it?" Ethan, looking every bit the poised young man, replied coldly, "Who cares about your stinking money? I work as a translator now and make way more than you do. I still take it every month, just because I don't want you to have an easy life. To me, it's pocket change, but to you, it's a heavy burden. Why should I lighten your load?" Richard's face turned ashen. Unable to stay there any longer, he ran off as if chased by ghosts. Word had it that he ultimately did marry Claire that year. Regardless, doing so helped minimize the negative impact as much as possible. After they got married, Richard was constantly pointed at and gossiped about behind his back. He felt that as long as Claire was by his side, he would never be able to hold his head high. It just so happened that Richard's mother was chronically ill and constantly needed someone to take care of her. He immediately sent Claire back to live with his mother. The old woman was difficult to live with and instinctively treated her daughters-in-law as enemies. Not to mention, Claire was the third party who had destroyed Diana and Richard's marriage, so the old lady immediately seized on her vulnerability. She constantly hurled insults at Claire, calling her things like vixen and cheap woman. Whenever she opened her mouth, it was to scold. If she wasn't scolding, she was hitting. Having lost her job and without any income, Claire was completely dependent on Richard, so she had no choice but to swallow her pride and endure it. Later on, as Richard's salary grew lower and lower, Claire could no longer stand the life full of torment and despair, and finally divorced him. By then, she was also in her 40s. The best years of her life had passed, and her reputation was nothing but a scandal. She could only scrape by doing odd jobs, but to her, even that was better than having to live alongside Richard's mother. Not long after Claire left, the old woman passed away. Finding manual labor too exhausting, Claire wanted to return and rely on Richard again, but she was flatly rejected. As for the son who had once pointed at Diana and cursed her as a stinking countrywoman, Claire had sent him back to be raised by his maternal grandparents. That precious child fell back into poverty. Rumor had it that he dropped out of school early and became a delinquent loitering around in society. 3 years passed. The initial agreement Diana had signed with the Survey Bureau, which committed to not changing the positions and jobs of the original employees for 3 years, had expired. Diana called Richard into her office for a talk. Now, every time he saw her, he trembled, as if facing a terrifying monster. Diana maintained the full demeanor of a leader, bossing him around and listing all sorts of his mistakes and weaknesses. Richard only dared to nod obediently, or occasionally offer a few timid words of defense. Finally, Diana concluded, "You are not suited to be a manager. So, what technical skills do you have?" Richard answered timidly, "You already know. I know surveying techniques." Diana replied coldly, "Useless to me." After saying that, she pointed to the door. "We're short on people to scrub toilets out there. That job suits you quite well. Do you want it or not?" Richard submitted his resignation and left. The application of his surveying skills was very narrow, making his life incredibly difficult. He ended up having to do all sorts of heavy, grueling labor. He was no longer a leading official, nor was he an esteemed technical pillar anymore. From then on, the heavy rain that had started in her previous life, which had drenched half of her life, finally stopped. The sky cleared and the clouds parted. Relieved, Diana stepped forward onto the wide, open road ahead.
The ultimate comeback isn't getting even, it's getting ahead and living a life infinitely better than theirs. Financial independence and self-reliance are truly a woman's strongest safety net.